The inequalities that autistic people face are incredibly stark. The only way to invest in changing that is to gather evidence that will really tell us about what works for autistic people and how we can actually deliver change.
Welcome to episode 2 of season 3 of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leadership, digital culture and change. I'm Zoe Ammer.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast seeks to bring you interviews with leaders from the public, private and third sector who are using digital to navigate uncertainty and forge a path to the future. On today's episode, we're sharing our conversation with James Cusack, who's Chief Executive at Autistica, the UK's autism research charity, who we talked with about the importance of neurodiversity in today's digital world. But before we introduce James, we want to say thank you for listening. We know there are many podcasts out there, many podcasts, and we're flattered that you've chosen to listen to ours. We had a fab start to this run with Maggie Philbin last week, so if you haven't listened to Maggie's episode, we'd highly recommend going back and listening to it. But Zoe, you wanted to discuss this week's announcement by the CEO of Citigroup about Zoom-free Fridays.
Yes, so I thought this is a really interesting story. So some of you may have seen, and we'll put the link in the show notes, that Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser has banned video calls on Fridays, and she's also launched a thing called a City Reset Day, and there's going to be a holiday, I think that's at the end of May, to kind of mark a new era of the way the organisation is going to work. She said that she wants the workforce to avoid scheduling meetings outside of normal working hours, and she said that there's been a real relentlessness to the way everyone's been working from home, that it's taken a toll on well-being and it's simply not sustainable. I think it's really positive and it's really brilliant to see a CEO who's sending out such a strong message about work-life balance and well-being, and also creating a very visible sign of leadership to say to people, look, I appreciate the hard work that you've put in, and we need to make sure that if we're going to continue working remotely, that we do it in a way that works for everyone and doesn't mean that people are going to get signed off sick for these long periods. So I thought that was really good to see that. And in fact, I put a tweet out this afternoon sharing the story, asking if anyone had any examples of someone doing something similar in the charity sector. And I know there are some charity leaders who have been very supportive of their team's well-being and encourage things like meeting free time and well-being days. So if you're someone who's got a great case study about that, then Paul and I would love to hear about that. So please do tweet us.
Definitely. And it comes in the same week. And there was a story about bankers, junior bankers at Goldman Sachs getting burnt out, you doing 100-hour working weeks and things like that. Nationwide today. So we're recording, what's the date today? We're recording on Thursday, the 25th of March. And today Nationwide announced that their 13,000 employees are entering a choose where to work, where you want to work anywhere phase. Apparently 57% of staff there wanted to work from home full time, and 36% want this hybrid approach where they can work in the office or at home, which is a huge amount of that employee base. I think it's going to be difficult for the people working in branches. But the phrase that their CEO used, and I really like this, was locate for their day, depending on what they need to achieve. So locate for your day, I think really does work well. You know, if you need to be in the office because you've got meetings or you're working as part of a team, then come in. If you're not, then it's okay to be at home. And I think that normality is going to be a big, or that change to normality is going to be a big change for all of us. And Santander as well was another big organization that said that they were going to be changing things, moving, I think, their head office out to Milton Keynes. They've already got a big operation in Milton Keynes, but making that even bigger. So I think it's interesting, isn't it, that lots of organizations are making this change. And I wonder whether the announcements have been timed nicely to meet the date this week, that we all sort of took a deep breath and said, well, it's been a year since we entered the first lockdown. So it's nice to see that organisations are making a change and taking that change forwards.
I think what's happening in all of these organisations is that the rules of engagement and the balance of power between the employees and the employer is being redrawn. And in my view, the savvy organisations like Nationwide are kind of going with that and thinking about how they can reconfigure the ways of working and the operations and everything like that, so that it works equally well on both sides. If anything, it's a little bit more weighted around the employees, and I think that can only be a good thing. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, you have what's been exposed at Goldman Sachs, which is this very, very top-down command and control culture as I understand it, based on what we've seen in those news stories. And again, coming back to the point about sustainability, moving into this new era, the way people are working now, is that very extreme imbalance sustainable? I don't think it is.
Yeah, and it has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? Because new employees that are looking at these organisations and deciding where to work are going to have a choice, and they can choose whether they want to go and work in an environment like Goldman Sachs and other big investment banks and places like that, or whether they take those skills to other employers where that balance is more pronounced. And I think, speaking for myself, that's what I've been seeking for the last couple of years, is that balance, and why I left a sort of a corporate organisation to go and do something on my own. So I think it works both ways, but I think that's going to be the interesting thing, is what the employee of the future is looking for. And I just sort of said at the dinner table just a minute ago to my 12-year-old, when he goes into the workplace, it might be a very different experience from what we traditionally have seen, Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, going into an office environment that we've got used to. He might never experience. Who knows?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I was talking to my 10-year-old the other week, and I was saying to him, when you're older, are you looking forward to Zoom calls? And he said, Mummy, I'm not going to bother with Zoom. I'm just going to go into the office. And he sounded so jaded when he said it. You're only 10. You're only 10.
Yeah, but it's what we see around us, isn't it? Even we just started watching Call My Agent last night, and just the idea that people were sat in offices and moving between rooms and not paying any attention to social distancing was just quite odd. Another big story that you wanted to talk about was Chrissy Teigen's decision to leave Twitter.
Yes, so we've talked about Chrissy Teigen on the podcast, I think last season, where you might remember that she's done some fantastic, very brave work on social media, talking about her experience of baby loss. And very sadly, just this week, she's announced that she's leaving Twitter. In fact, she's already gone. And she said that, and basically what the story seems to imply, that she has found being on Twitter really, really difficult, a real kind of bullying culture. And it was pretty disturbing as well, seeing the reaction to the news, because there were a lot of people, when I was on Twitter this morning, saying, we're so glad that she's left Twitter. And there was almost a kind of rejoicing from the people who were bullying her. And I think it's just awful. I mean, it really, really shows the stage that we've got to with social media now. Someone like that, she's a woman, she's smart, she's funny, she's done some fantastic work campaigning in a very, very difficult taboo area. And she's kind of been drummed off the platform. And that's a failure of the platform. It's a failure of their content moderation. And it's just awful that we're treating people like this. It's not acceptable. And if we were doing the same thing, real life, it wouldn't be right. You would have the police all over it. I was reading an interview the other day with the actor David Harewood, who gets a huge amount of racist abuse on Twitter. And apparently he doesn't actually pick up his phone in the morning now, because he's so used to the first thing that he sees being this horrible trolling. And if you couldn't leave your house without someone saying horrendous things to you and horrific racial abuse, the police would be on that. But because it's social media, action isn't taken. And I think that's a failure of the social media platforms, and it's a failure of the regulation or lack of.
Yeah, there's nothing really to argue with there, is there? I think it's an indication perhaps of the direction that, not the direction, but the way that Twitter as a platform is being used in particular. I know it's not just Twitter, there are other social platforms where this happens, but it does seem to be a problem that Twitter has had for a long time and hasn't addressed. And I'm not quite sure where they go from here. And speaking personally, I've found it a problematic channel, especially in the last year or two, but for a number of years. The reason I fell in love with Twitter in the first place just isn't there anymore. And I think Chrissy talked in the article that I saw, the write-up that I saw, had talked about the fact that, it used to be a community, and she feels that she's leaving a community and possibly letting a community of people down by not being there anymore. But I think that's the sense that I always used to have with Twitter, that it was a community of people of shared interests, those shared interests were debated, those subjects were eagerly debated, that we waited to sort of share ideas and have discussions on Twitter because it was warmly accepted and debated, and the conversation was strong. And just over the past few years, it's just dripped away, I think. If I didn't have to, and if I didn't think that Twitter was a part of the social media landscape that I'm talking to my clients about and how they interact with the channel, then perhaps I'd think about leaving it too, because I don't know that it's always doing what it needs to do. It's not to say that I don't have wonderful conversations on Twitter. It's not to say that I haven't met some amazing people over Twitter, but I think the good is slowly being outweighed by the bad. And I think something does need to change, and something needs to give. Perhaps Twitter will start to listen if more big names like Chrissy Teigen do start to leave the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And you imagine the commercial consequences of someone like her leaving the platform as well. So I saw some other coverage which said that she's actually been brought in as a speaker previously, I think, at some of the Twitter kind of all hands meetings and things like that. So presumably she won't be doing that anymore. And the kind of, the advertising and stuff like that she'll have done on that platform, although she does a lot on Instagram, as those of you who follow her will know. But actually her leaving, I mean, this, as you say, that's going to take a chunk out of the engagement for that platform. Maybe that's the thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should explore a bit further on this, or in some blog posts or something, because I think there's a much bigger discussion here and a much bigger sort of cultural moment in time, I think, as we really start to wake up to what's happening on these platforms, how we can start to change that. But on to our interview. We spoke to James in mid-February of this year. A slight disclaimer, James did say at the beginning that he had some building work happening close by. I can't remember whether it was his house or a neighbour's on the day of recording. So there's a bit of background noise towards the end, which we've done our best, or Beth, our producer, has done her best to remove. The joys of working and recording from home. So without further ado, here's our interview with James.
So today on the podcast, we are absolutely delighted to welcome James Cusack, who's CEO of Autistica. He joined Autistica in September 2015 as their Director of Science, following a career in autism research at the University of Aberdeen. From a young age, James has also worked directly with families affected by autism, and he has experience in clinical, educational and social care settings. James has sat on a number of advisory panels discussing the role of research in autism, and he was involved in the production of the report, A Future Made Together. He was part of a core stakeholder group which successfully campaigned for Scotland's first ever autism strategy. He became CEO of Autistica in 2020, and he is the UK's first openly autistic charity CEO. James, it is a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me and for the introduction. Really appreciate it.
We would love to hear a bit more about you and your role at Autistica, because obviously you've been there for some time, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've been chief executive since August. That's about 6 months. I've been in this role for quite a short amount of time, but previous to that, I was our director of science. So I was in that job for almost exactly 5 years. And so it's really been quite a busy time for us. We've really changed quite an awful lot in that time. We were really, when I joined, a grant funder and someone who funded research grants. And since then, we've really tried to expand our operation and tried to really think quite strategically about how we can change things for autistic people through research, and how research can actually make a difference for autistic people. And so that's meant that we've done a range of different things. We've set up a network that allows autistic people to get more, and their families to get more engaged in autism research. We've had a range of different initiatives. We've really focused on the outcomes that autistic people face. So we've really highlighted things like the health inequalities that autistic people face. And now we're really looking to the next 10 years and really thinking about what it is that Autistica can do to drive real change for autistic people. And now we're just in the process of setting some big long-term goals that could really improve the lives of autistic people.
Thank you. And those issues that you mentioned, those various challenges and also opportunities that those with autism face, do you think that they're getting enough airtime in the media? I mean, obviously there's a campaigning element to what you do, but do you think that as a society we're aware enough of these issues?
Autism affects at least 1 in 100 people in the UK, so that's 700,000 people And autism is a condition which really affects how you perceive and interact with the world around you, including people. And at the moment, I think it's definitely true that society's awareness of autism is much greater than it was 20 years ago, which is a fantastic step forward and really, really positive. But I think society's understanding of autism does need to improve. And I think there is an increasing acknowledgement that autistic people need better support and practice. I think there's an awful lot of work to do to try and really ensure that from day one, autistic people are getting the support that they need. And, in particular, as a research charity, the quality of evidence that families and autistic people have to rely on is very, very poor. And, really, if we're serious about changing the lives of autistic people and their families, we need to really be investing in this drivers of change that will lead to actual systemic change for autistic people and their families. And that means doing things like investing in research and making sure that we're running trials and we're really accurately looking at what works and what doesn't work for different types of autistic people as well. And we know that the consequences of not doing this are quite serious for autistic people. We know that autistic people face reduced life expectancy, markedly increased rates of mental health problems. So around half of autistic children have meet clinical criteria for an anxiety disorder by the time they're in primary school. We know that this also goes on to affect the quality of life as autistic people become adults. So many people are denied opportunities to enter the workplace. In fact, of any disabled group, autistic graduates are the most likely to be unemployed as well. So, we've got all of these different outcomes that we face. And so, the inequalities that autistic people face are, incredibly stark. The only way to invest in changing that is to gather evidence that will really tell us about what works for autistic people and how we can actually deliver change, because if we don't face this challenge, then we're going to have a huge set of issues. And so that's really what we're trying to do as a charity. And I think, while it's great that society is more aware of autism, we have to do the work to change it, to change things for autistic people. And if we don't, then we're going to have a problem.
Well, thank you for all the amazing work that you and your team are doing to shine a light on such an important area. And that theme of inclusion and understanding what works for different groups is something I'd love to pick up on a bit later in this conversation, because there seems to be a huge issue as workplaces begin to reopen, as we start to see what this new world of work potentially looks like and how we can make that as inclusive as possible for everyone. But before we come to that, I'd love to hear a bit more about the role that digital plays in the work that Autistica does.
So I think digital is obviously important for all charities, and I think it's important in different ways. I've only ever worked at Autistica. It's always more difficult for me to get a bit of a baseline, having only ever worked at one charity before. But I think that the population of people that we serve, that being autistic people and families, it means that digital has a unique role to play for us. And so, I think the first thing is that, in terms of providing information and content, having a clear set of approaches is really, really important. So, we've worked really hard in terms of how we deliver information. Not all of our offer really in terms of how we support autistic people and their families is digital. And that's what, I think it's probably worth flagging. And what we are primarily a research charity, but we also do policy work and we also deliver information to autistic people and their families. And so a big thing that we've been doing is moving towards providing information. And we've really accelerated that since the beginning of the pandemic. So doing things like Facebook Live events, having information accessible online and doing different types of webinars. But the other thing that we've also done is from the beginning of starting a conference. So I mentioned earlier that we've set up a network. From the moment that we hosted that conference, we also hosted that conference online. And we streamed that as free to access for community members. And the reason that we did that is simply because it's not easy for all autistic people or families to access a conference. That involves them getting on a train. The conference that we had was based in London. That's quite a busy environment. So being able to offer something digitally or offer something like a conference digitally has been really important for us, because that opens the event up to a whole new community. Because we wanted to make it autism friendly type event, we limited the capacity to 300 people. So our conference was also selling out really quickly. So we needed to make it digital to open it up to a broader group of people. So we've just always had this mindset that this was always like a hybrid event anyway. And so I think for us, digital can be like can really make things more accessible for people. I mean, it's important to recognize that not all people can access a conference online either, but it's a step forward for us. And so, that's been really, really important. And I think the other thing that we've really thought an awful lot about in terms of digital is just how we make our content accessible. And the fact, I think we're quite conscious that different autistic people in particular need to access content in different ways. And so we've got a podcast which we do as well, but we've also got, like I said, the webinars and the website. And it's just trying to provide different ways of making content accessible to people. And then, I think the other thing that we've spent a lot of time doing is user testing. So user testing in particular with autistic people and families to try and understand whether our assumptions are correct. So that's a big principle that we have at Autistica, is that we always involve autistic people and families in everything that we do. We've got a number of staff members in the team who are autistic themselves. And so we're all continuously trying to check that what we do is accessible to people. And, I think for us, a sort of take home is, if you look at the network and so on, I think we've got almost 15,000 people on our network now. We've sort of slowly grown that. And it's because that sort of digital form of delivery really works well for our stakeholder group.
That's so exciting, because in many, many ways, it feels like you guys are absolutely ahead of the curve. So the fact that your conference, for example, was always a bit of a hybrid event, and then you were able to pivot and make that a digital event. And the fact that what you're doing is so much about that co-creation and that user testing and approaching things in a very iterative way, particularly around accessibility. I mean, that's fantastic. And I think that's a very strong case study that so many other charities could learn from. So on that note, you talked at the start of that answer about how charities are obviously increasingly reliant on digital. And as they grow that use of digital, how do you think they should be factoring neurodiversity into their plans so they can be as inclusive as possible?
I think the great thing about the word neurodiversity is that it's actually inclusive of everyone. And I really like the term neurodiversity for a lot of reasons. I think it means that you're just not talking about people who have neurodevelopmental conditions or who are neurodivergent in some way, which would be sort of mean they have some meaningful difference, which makes them different. The great thing about neurodiversity is that it's celebrating the fact that everyone is different from one another, and we all think about the world and we all see the world differently. And I think that's a really good thing for people to be aware of. First of all, I think, in society, there's been a sort of temptation, I think, within things like schools, to make children aware of autism or ADHD or these different types of conditions. And I would much rather that children were just made aware of the fact that we're all actually different, and as part of that, learn about autism and so on. But I think it's really interesting that one thing I've really observed amongst children and teenagers and people as they grow up is they have this overwhelming need to sort of conform and sort of fit in with everyone and sort of conform to this sort of type of person that they think they should be. And I think the great thing about neurodiversity is that it moves that conversation on and actually gets people to celebrate the fact that they're all different. So I think that's the first thing to really sort of emphasize, is that if we all acknowledge that we're different and we all acknowledge that we have different preferences in terms of how we sort of digest information, that's a really positive thing to acknowledge and to be aware of. And then I think if you acknowledge that and then become aware of that, then you can sort of embrace the fact that people just have different preferences. And so, in that context, I think that is ultimately what it's all about. It's about really, in terms of these digital, understanding that people might just have different communication preferences in terms of how they interact online. So, within our team meetings, it's accepting the fact that some people just prefer to use chat. They're not going to put their hands up and speak. It's having, proper etiquette in place that will allow people to contribute. It's trying to sort of make the purposes of meetings really clear. And it's also just explaining, like from the beginning, what the ground rules are for communication and making it sure that people can feel empowered to use whatever option works well for them. So, I think the major key thing with this is just options and giving people different options. We've had a lot of people sort of come to us and say, talk to us about digital health and, how does digital health work for autistic people? And we've had some people go, oh, surely this just works brilliantly for all autistic people. This is Like, this is the thing that's going to really empower them and improve healthcare. You've had other people going, oh, sure, this is an absolute disaster, like, because it's confusing and so on. And the reality is it just depends on the autistic person. The principle is very simple. It's around personalization and thinking about what works well for that person. Some people find it difficult having their camera on and speaking to lots of different people. With a camera on, they just find it hard to adjust to because they spent their whole life adjusting to a set of norms, and then this is a new set of norms. Some people find it a lot easier than speaking on the phone. So a lot of autistic people find speaking on the phone really difficult. Some people find that, like I said earlier, the chat function empowering. But the key thing is just, again, that personalization, that idea that you can have a range of different tools that allow people to interact, and that, that can work for people, and just, just setting expectations in a clear way. And then, there's just other accessibility things, like making sure that the same things don't apply that you would in a general event. So, not having unexpected loud noises, making sure that there's ample time for people to step out of meetings as well. And I guess what I would always say is, when you talk about making these events accessible, you're not just making them accessible for autistic people, you're making them accessible for everyone, because we all benefit when we make these types of changes. And I think there's a number of initiatives that we do, around employment and so on, where we hand out interview questions ahead of time and so on, which we've been advocating for a couple of years. But and everyone sort of thinks, oh, that's really good for autistic people, but it just tends to be good for everyone. Like, I think that's the key thing, I'd say.
I was going to say, without sort of wanting to appear sort of glib about it, but this is probably the time, the last 18 months, we're all experiencing things very differently from the way that we've experienced them before. So leveling that field is probably an opportunity. I mean, the question I was going to ask was going to be about increased isolation. We're all feeling that as well. But what you're saying is, well, increased isolation for autistic people, is it just the same as it is for anybody else? We're all going to have to deal with that in our own way. And so that diversity, that leveling of the playing field, that trying new things and trying different ways to communicate to everyone is just what has become normal for most of us.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think there's an extent to which that's true. Definitely, autistic people, because many have less connections and social connections, have been felt left during the pandemic to feel particularly stranded because their services have been cut back and so on. So I think that has definitely had a very acute effect on them. But what I think is interesting in terms of talking about leveling the playing field is, it's interesting. So autistic people and disabled people have been saying for years, why can't I work from home? We have the technology to do this now. We can work remotely. And people had all of these sorts of expectations around productivity and so on. And guess what? We could have done it the whole time. And I guess that's one other thing where I feel like Autistica has been quite fortunate. We've just been set up to work like this. And when the pandemic hit, we had a business continuity plan in place, but really, with the exception of moving more to sort of online meetings, it was just quite routine for people to work from home at Autistica. And so it was, the transition was quite smooth for us. And I think there was a large extent to which people were asking, how are the sort of autistic people in your team managing with this? And I would say pretty well, actually. There's a number of things that they are finding difficult, and like the rest of the team are finding difficult. We're all still going through the same stuff where you sort of wake up every morning and you're like, oh, wow, this is hard, and it's hard to concentrate, and I miss people, and and so on. So you're still having those experiences, but actually the transition has been quite smooth for us in many ways, despite all of the challenges and uncertainty, which is really hard, for autistic people to manage. Everyone's doing really well.
That's really interesting what you say, James, because some of those techniques that you mentioned there, I'm neurotypical, but I'm an introvert. And those ideas that you mentioned about how to make meetings more inclusive, they are music to my ears. They sound like a really good, really productive, inclusive way to run things. And actually, that very helpful advice you've just given, it's also got me thinking as a leader, as a manager, about how I should be offering my team and the clients that we work with as well, those different choices about how you communicate. Do you think with the rise of remote working that we've seen during the pandemic, do you think it's quite one size fits all, that there are sometimes in other organisations, there's this thing of this channel is just for this and this network is just for this, rather than perhaps offering those choices?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, because I've only ever worked at Autistica, it's really hard to get a baseline on this. I mean, I think what I hear from people that work at Autistica is that it's quite an accepting workplace where everyone works together in quite a productive way. Where everyone always thinks that we're big, but really we're a team of 20 people and everyone works very collaboratively together and everyone knows each other and everyone's very accepting. So we've got quite fortunate in that regard, in so much as we all, we're sort of small enough that everyone can sort of work together and understand each other very effectively. And I think that does undoubtedly help. And I think it's sort of, we're quite a sort of accepting team of people who are all switched on. And I think if you join Autistica, you understand, that's the sort of culture and that's the sort of approach. I think one of the things that I'm always really thinking about the team working, remotely is, what can we do to support people? How can we sort of prioritize people's well-being? How can we help them to be more productive? I think the key thing, and I guess it's sort of a bit of an overarching theme of what I've been saying, is like, you can't just do one thing that makes life better for everyone. And that's like the hard thing. Like, you sort of thinking about social activities, that might be good for sort of half of your team, but it's not going to be good for everyone. So you just have to constantly offer like a range of different options. So we've done things like buddy schemes. We've said to the team that there's no meetings between 12:30 and 1:30. That people don't have to adhere to it. Some people want to work through, and that's fine as well. But that's just a break to show that it's okay to take a break as well. And just continuously reminding people that we're here to support them, that we have these range of options in place, and then also just trying to model that behaviour yourself. So making it clear that you are going out for a run at lunchtime and so on. And I think that's the key. But yeah, like you say, in an effort to adapt this way of remote working, there is a temptation to then sort of try and get everyone, in order to promote their well-being, doing these different things and productivity. But actually the risk is that actually they don't work for everyone. And you've just got to find a range of solutions, because although we're all having this common shared experiences, there's people in our team who are parents, there are people in our team who are lonely, there are people in our team who are, facing a range of different experiences. And it's just trying to be aware of that the whole time and just trying to think about how we can best serve everyone.
You mentioned just quickly. You mentioned just then, going for a run. That that in a way, that's a way that leadership has to change. You have to say, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm leading by example. I've got to go out and do a run. So you should feel that you ought to. Are there any other ways that you've noticed that your leadership has changed in the last 18 months? Well,
it's been an odd time for me because I sort of became chief executive during a pandemic. So I guess like having stepped into that leadership role at that time, it has made me just reflect on the sort of person the team need me to be and what's the best, what most productive way to behave. I think the main thing really is just being a bit more open and honest, and just acknowledging that it can be quite tough and that it's okay to admit that it feels like it can be quite tough. And, I've tried to use that as a way to talk to the team about things and to make them know that like it's okay to feel like, you're finding this challenging. I think the other thing is just being really open about where we are as a charity and the sort of decisions that you're making, and just trying to communicate in a quite a clear way and updating people regularly, because I think this is quite an uncertain time for people. And we've seen that there's been chief executives across the charity sector who have had to make difficult decisions, and it's just trying to add that certainty and explain why we're doing what we're doing. Even things like our lease ended in December, and just trying to explain to them like, when are we going to go back to an office, and just updating people every month and just, this is where we are, this is the situation, this is the criteria that we use to make the decision, we'll always consult you, and let people know. And so I think it's just sort of clear communication, just explaining the situation all the time and taking it from there. And then I think probably the other thing that we've noticed is just, I guess, in terms of our stakeholders are closer to us, just bringing those people closer to us as well, and being really open and honest, particularly with our donors, and just saying, this is the situation, this is what we're doing. We've not really done that as much. And I guess that's been another great thing, is just those digital type events where we've managed to have quite small group conversations, and we've just been very, very open and honest and went, here's the situation, here's where we are financially, this is what we're going to do next, this is a plan. And, that's really been something which has really put us in a strong position coming into this year. So I think, when the pandemic hit, we were quite anxious about the effect it would have on the charity, but we're now in a pretty positive position, and we're able to sort of really build into that coming into this year.
So it's been a year of such huge change for everyone, as you were saying. And as a leader, has this time made you think differently about digital?
Yeah, I definitely think it has. I think, it's basically made it clear that, we don't have, as a charity, we don't have boots on the ground across the UK. So we don't have that local connection. So for us, it has to be digital, really. Like it has to, that's how we're going to reach people. In our strategy as an organization, we committed to delivering information, and this was something that was new for us. So we when I joined, like I said, we were a research charity, and then we just funded research. And then we sort of started thinking quite strategically about how we shape research in the UK. Then we started doing policy work. And now we're sort of moving towards doing information. And the whole thing is really with the mindset of like, how do we make sure that evidence and research makes a difference in the real world? And when we thought about doing information, we were like, all right, this is going to be like a 6-month process. We're going to slowly develop this. We're going to slowly develop this. And then the pandemic hit. And then we're like, well, actually, we've got research-based things that can help autistic people and their families right now. And this is quite an acute period for them, because autistic people were being pulled out of school and they weren't really sure what was going to happen next. Lots of support was being withdrawn. And, as I mentioned earlier, a big thing about autism is just the uncertainty and managing that uncertainty. If you look back to March, I don't really think it mattered who you were. We were all like scrolling BBC News, looking at the daily briefing, just going like, what is happening? What is going to happen next? And how do I convince myself this is going to be okay? And I think, we really felt with our community, we had a responsibility to do something. So, we basically took our information campaign and approached information, which we sort of saw happening in a matter of months, and really just did it in a matter of days. So we put webinars online, we put information online, and we moved a lot more quickly than we thought we would. I guess what I've learned is like, there is like you do just kind of sometimes just need to get on with it, and reach people, and really we should have, we would have user tested that information, but sometimes when you followed all these different gold standard processes, sometimes you do just also need to get things out to people, when they need that support. And we've really had record engagement on our website, and over the last 12 months we've had people really engaging with us in a way that they haven't in the past. And so I guess that for me is one really key thing, is that actually this is a really good opportunity for us to help support our community in a really positive. I think obviously we've all looked at ways of working, and it's just became really evident that we were looking at expanding our office before this pandemic, and because we've seen a growth in headcount, and I think it's now quite clear that our sort of understanding of the office has evolved rapidly. And I think for us, thinking about the office and ways of working and making them accepting to all forms of neurodiversity and autistic people and so on is really an interesting challenge for us. Like, how do we shape our future ways of working, and what role does digital play in that? Because I think there's going to be quite a tense, as we sort of maybe do return to sort of a form of office. How do you make that accessible and inclusive, and and not go back to that sort of thing where someone's dialing in but they're not really as present in the meeting as everyone else? Because we all remember pre-pandemic dialing in, and it's like a subpar experience. Really, you don't get to participate in the meeting in the same way that everyone else does. So, how do we sort of address some of those issues and make sure that people can feel included? So, I think that is definitely like a really big one for us. And then I guess maybe this is less me thinking differently, but I guess what is clear to me now is like some of the barriers that we thought existed in terms of delivering on some of our projects are less likely to exist now. So, we have a health check which we're looking to deliver for autistic people. It's an annual health check to really try and address health inequalities that autistic adults face, and the fact they experience a markedly lower life expectancy than the general population. But as part of designing that, one of the things that when I was director of science that I was really keen to do is to have this digital tool that basically people can use pre-appointment, which explains some of the adjustments that people can make, and these sort of reasonable adjustments that can be made in the real environment, which will help autistic people. Also, things like the waiting room, the sensory environment, and different things like that, how people are asked questions, and then also to sort of pick up sort of different pieces of health information. About a year ago, we were looking at sort of the different risks of sort of implementing this health check. I think we would have said, oh, it's just not going to be possible. It might not be possible to do this digital toolkit immediately because the NHS are going to be really resistant to this, and GP surgery is going to be really resistant to this. But I think now it looks completely possible that we can implement that digital toolkit, and actually will be warmly welcomed. So I feel like it's an idea that's just came along at the right time now, whereas actually something which maybe felt like it was a bit too early. Health services might be resistant to innovation. So I think people are now welcoming that digital type of innovation in a way which is really positive and actually totally coincides with what we're trying to do as a charity. So I think that's like so exciting because, for us, if we could get that digital toolkit working for autistic people, then that can make the health check more accessible. Not only does it make the health service more effective and efficient, it's going to really help autistic people have a better experience in their GP surgery and a more personalized experience. And that's just a huge win-win for us. So I think that's a big thing that I see is just huge opportunity. And then I guess probably the final thing, which I guess I touched on earlier, is just in terms of reaching our supporters and having different types of conversations with them. I think having like a digital type conversation over Zoom is so much easier to organize than having like an in-person meeting. And actually there's something you sort of almost lose the formality a little bit in a way as well. So you can just be a little bit more open in terms of how you have the conversation as well. It's a bit more personal. They see you in, your own house with your like dodgy green wall and terrible curtains. I think that just makes it much more engaging as well. So, I think that that's a really important thing as well. Is, I think so. And it allows you to do things at a much greater pace as well. So I think that's really positive too.
I think there's going to be there already is an unexpected consequence, all of this. And I think you've touched on it, but I think it's a growing sense of confidence because people are being forced into making quick and fast changes, trying things out and seeing that the world doesn't fall apart. As you said, there's a whole bunch of people out there that are warmly welcoming of the things that you're doing that you didn't expect. Beforehand. So I think that confidence will shine through. Just to finish off, because I know we're running short on time, you're working on lots of exciting projects that involve digital, and I'm particularly interested in Autistica Play. I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, as I'm a big gamer, and we have friends that I know have children who have various levels of autism who engage very, very keenly through games. And I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that and any other projects that you'd like to highlight that you're working on at the moment.
Sure. Autistica Play is an initiative which we set up to try and help build partnerships with the games industry. So we know that autistic people have a huge affinity with games, and not all autistic people, but many autistic people, and that many autistic people have reported that it's been a really good way for them to build connections with people, to learn different things and different skills that they've been able to apply into their life as well. But we also know that games can have a reputation as being these things that autistic people get over engaged and so on. So, there's a real interest in how we harness games in a positive way that promote the well-being of autistic people. And so to do that, we've been building these different relationships to the games industry and also to support with our fundraising as well. And it's been a huge success for us. We've built a range of different good relationships, and we've got our first partnership with DPS Games, and they're helping us with an employment initiative as well, because we know that there's a number of people who work in the games industry are autistic themselves as well. And so how can they make that as an industry inclusive for autistic people? And so we've got a partnership with them. We've also got a number of live streaming events as well, which we do, which are fundraising events. That's been a huge hit. And I think the key for us is really been having someone who's worked in the games industry work with us to try and help us understand it, because I'm not an expert in games at all. It's been definitely an education for me, and I think it's really helped us to bridge that gap in terms of building partnerships. And then just in terms of other things that we've got going on, I'm really excited about a project that we've got going on at the Alan Turing Institute, which is a partnership that we have with them, and it's a citizen science project. And what we're in the process of creating is a tool that will allow autistic people to report their experiences of different types of built environments, to try and really build an understanding of what does actually autism friendly mean, and what are people's experiences of the actual real world around them. And we're going to really try and collect as much data as we can and try and pick up trends on that. And I think it's a really exciting and empowering project, which will really tell us a lot more about different types of autistic people's experience of the world around them, and really help us to answer this question about what is an autism friendly environment, what is an enabling environment for autistic people. And then the other thing that we've got going on is we've got our second version of our app coming out, which is called Molehill Mountain. And that's an app which we've developed with researchers at King's. And that's a proper partnership, again, where we're doing the design of the app, the user testing of the app. They're helping us with the research side. And what we're trying to create is a research-informed app that will help autistic people with the management of their anxiety. Because as I talked about earlier, we know that half of children, by the time they're in primary school, have a meet criteria for an anxiety disorder. And we know that anxiety is an issue which tends to be a challenge for autistic people throughout their life. And so the idea is that this app can, potentially help with that. So, we've got a range of different things coming out over the course of this year, which we're really excited about. That Molehill Mountain app comes out in April, and the Citizen Science Project should be out at some point during this year as well. And we're really excited about both of them, and also about how we can, and just go back to the Citizen Science Project, really excited about how we can build partnerships with different organizations, so companies, the health service, so we, how can we work with, again, like hospitals, to share findings about what autistic people's experience of the health service actually is, and for them to help them make that more accessible too. So yeah, a lot going on, but really, as you can see, really exciting things to look forward to for us this year, I think.
Wow, James, that sounds fascinating. And if there's anything that you'd like us to link people to in the show notes, we're really happy to do that. And we'd love to hear how all of those projects go. They sound brilliant and very much needed. Well, on that note, we know you're a busy man and you've got lots of things to do. We're so grateful for you giving up your time today to talk to us, and for shining a light on the really fascinating, important issues that you and your team are working on at Autistica. And thank you so much for sharing your journey and your advice for leaders.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you to James for a fantastic conversation. It definitely helped me to appreciate the inequalities that autistic people face, and the importance of neurodiversity and how it's represented in the workplace and beyond. I really like that point about how Austica's annual conference was set up as a hybrid event, both online and off. And not only do those types of events work really well for autistic people, but they also allow more people and a wider variety of people to get involved. And I think we've seen a lot of that with some of these events that have moved online, a wider attendance and involvement. Zoe, any takeaways you'd like to share?
The big thing that really stuck with me from James's interview was his point about how if we improve the way we work and we communicate for people who are neurodiverse, then actually it improves things for everyone across the board in the organisation. So that's something that's been in the back of my mind whilst been working with clients over the last few weeks, because I think neurodiversity is sometimes seen as a bit of a niche issue, but actually, as James was saying, if we can take the principles about how to improve things, then that could be really positive for all employees.
Definitely. So thank you to James, and we'll include links to Autistica and how you can get in touch with James in the show notes. Before we go, I'd just like to say that we had some amazing feedback on our book and music recommendations in the last episode. Well, at least my wife said that she liked it. So I think we should make that a regular feature. So I've just finished a novel. I sort of mentioned this last week and then quickly dismissed it because, we're a podcast about leadership and digital and change and all those things. So to mention a novel might be a bit problematic. fantastic. But I've just finished a book called Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton, which is a novel about two brothers growing up in 80s suburban Brisbane. And I absolutely loved this book. It's based on his life. He's a journalist now, but based on his life growing up. It has it all. It's fast paced, feels quite cinematic. It's got a drug dealing mother, a drug dealing stepfather. It's sort of got a magic surrealist type quality to it. And I think it's being turned into a TV series, but I absolutely loved it. And it's one of those rare books where you're thinking all the way through it. I hope he nails the ending, and he absolutely landed it. So I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And music wise, I keep coming back to In a Song by Kelly Lee Owens. I know I've mentioned this one to you, Zoe. I think it complements your choice last week of the Bicep album Isles, but Kelly Lee Owens In a Song has just been on my sort of heavy rotation list for about a year now. Zoe, anything you'd like to share?
I have just finished a fantastic autobiography by the comedian Tom Allen called No Shame, and it's an absolute treat. I'd really recommend it. I bought it because I heard him being interviewed on the Fortunately podcast, and I'm used to him. I think he's really funny. I really like him. It's very acerbic, but actually the book is very sort of thoughtful, and it's about his journey of coming to accept himself as a gay man. And it's just so interesting. I mean, it's a brilliant book about self-acceptance and how we see ourselves, how the world sees us, and the kind of shame that he felt, and how he kind of got past that, and how he made some of his insecurities part of his comedy act. So I'd really recommend it. It's a beautiful, very moving, very well written book.
Excellent. I have to look it out. So thank you for listening to episode 2 of season 3. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, I think, with another episode. We're going to take a short break for the Easter holidays, so we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, time to eat chocolate. As usual, please send us your feedback. We'd love to hear about anything that you feel you'll do differently after hearing from any of our speakers from the series. You can share your plans, ideas, or questions with us on Twitter. We're at startsattethetop1, and you can email us at startsatthetoppodcast@gmail.com.
If your platform allows it, please leave us a 5-star review. And thank you to you all for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon.